Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2005's Haunting Ground, Capcom's obscure survival horror game about a young woman and her canine companion attempting to escape a castle full of people obsessed with using her body for nefarious purposes.
Following that is the definitive edition of the Phantom Thieves Taking Your Heart, adding a 3rd semester and a new ending to the game amongst a swath of improvements to the original stylish JRPG, 2020's Persona 5 Royal. What a theme you've concocted for us this week, Joe, as we're back with both of us here. Thanks for taking over on the solo episode there. Yeah, I had a work emergency come up, and then this week I got into a car accident, so we're shuffling our recording around. It's a whole messy time for me, but I really appreciate it, though. You've come up with this theme between these 2 games. Quote, games where somebody explores a castle alongside their animal companion, and that castle is owned by a pervert.
It's so perfect. It's so perfect.
I mean, that's the beginning of Persona 5 to a T, I'll say.
And that's the entirety of Haunting Ground. It worked out perfectly, and I think it's one of the most fitting themes I've ever been able to come up with for this show.
Love it. Perfect. Well, it's been a couple weeks since we've gotten to chat, so how are you doing and what are you playing?
I still have not really been playing anything. Despite buying 3 games since last time we talked, I bought Nier on Switch, I haven't started it. I bought Little Nightmares 2 on PC, I haven't started it. And I bought Ori and the Will of the Wisp on Switch, and I haven't started it.
Well, some games to definitely try at some point, because, yeah, you still have to play that Ori sequel, that's right. And then Nier Automata is supposed to be an amazing port.
Yep, that's what Matt tells me. It's mostly, for the most part, it's just been watching other people play games. Matt and I started streaming Sonic Boom, The Rise of Lyric, on the NWR channel. Just as fun as you'd think. Unfortunately, it's the patched version, so it's not quite as fun as it was, but that's fine. And then I also, Alex, one of the other people over at NWR that does streams with us, I co-piloted him through Oxenfree because he had never played it before. And I figured, hey, spooky season, let's play some Oxenfree.
That might be when I get to finally get around to spooky season. That would make sense. I started and beat the Somnium Files Nirvana Initiative within the span of a few days.
Yeah, you booked it through there.
Yeah, it was a whirlwind getting through that game, and it was fun to kind of, check in with you and, theories and reveals and things like that. Looking back on your assessment of the game, I definitely agree that the main twist in the original is better. It makes more sense. It has a bigger wallop and punch. This one is just, if you say so, I think I'm going to have to watch a YouTube video to make sure how that really ended up working and not have, plot holes all over the place. But the game was much better to play. Mm-hmm. I think the Somniums, as you said, were a little bit more directed, made more sense to progress through. The last Somnium, of course, being you have a ton of options to go through and decide how to navigate that, but it made more sense with the story and everything compared to go through these lettered doors randomly. And so, I think the design of all that was so much better. I appreciated the secret ending. That was neat. It gave a little bonus for Zero Escape fans that I think was super neat. As far as the soundtrack goes, I think it's a really good soundtrack. I don't think it's going to be in our top 10 by year's end. Maybe an honorable mention, mostly because I think it just builds on a lot of the themes in the original game. and it's, Keisuke Ito doing the music, and it's great, but there were a couple good new songs in there, I think, but a lot of it kind of foundationally built on the original songs from 2019's I, the Somnium Files. Good to hear that, Kumakura hideout theme. That's a classic. Love that. Just a great experience. Really enjoyed it. But on to the next one.
It's currently on my top 10 soundtracks of the year, but that's mostly because, like, most of the stuff I've played, I haven't gone to listen to the stuff I haven't played yet. But most of the stuff I've played has just been like, yeah, that's fine, I guess. All right.
Mm-hmm. And we've got a lot still to come out through the end of the year here, so.
Oh, yeah, more than you'd think in the last 3 months of the year. So we don't have any composer follow-up news this week because it's been really slow, actually, recently. I assume most places have announced their stuff because the holidays are coming up and they need to make sure people know their stuff's coming out in November.
Mm-hmm.
So announcements and stuff have slowed down. So let's jump straight into Haunting Ground. Now, most of you listening have probably never heard of this game, and that's to be expected. It was released for the PlayStation 2 on April 21st, 2005 in Japan, and then in the PAL regions, April 29th, 2005, and then May 10th, 2005 in North America. In Japan, it is actually called Demento. It's a pretty good name.
It's a pretty good name, but it also makes sense why they changed it for North America.
Yeah. It is developed and published by Capcom. It is a survival horror game where you must explore a castle in order to find a way out. You control the 18-year-old Fiona Belli, who, after a car accident with her parents, oh, that's unfortunately timing, wakes up in a cage somewhere in a castle's dungeon, naked and covered with only a sheet. As she wanders the castle grounds, she eventually finds a bedroom where the castle's very strange maid Daniela provides her with a set of new clothes. As she explores the interior of the castle, she is put face to face with Debilitas, a massive man with a very low intelligence, who quickly decides Fiona is very pretty, and he sure would like to use her as a literal actual doll to play with. So he begins to pursue Fiona throughout the castle, but she is able to escape him by hiding. Shortly after, Fiona encounters a white shepherd dog named Huey, who begins working as her partner. Now, I do need to mention, as you might have gathered by this point, Haunting Ground does work with a lot of themes of things like sexual objectification and voyeurism, and it has no problem really leaning into these things. Nothing is ever like outright shown, or unless you get the bad ending, outright happens. But the implication is that is the idea. That Fiona herself is kind of being seen as not so much a person, and the whole theme of having like her bodily autonomy taken away from her in this situation, essentially. If that makes sense. I am not qualified to talk about that. There are people far more qualified than me who have written about this game, and you should definitely go look into what those people have said. In terms of gameplay, Fiona doesn't really have very many combat capabilities. She can kick, and it's a pretty good kick. You can actually equip like weighted boots that make her kick stronger, which is really funny. And she can also tackle enemies if she needs to. More often, though, she's going to have to run and hide because there aren't really a lot of regular enemies in this game. But if she runs or tackles too much, she will run out of stamina, and this will cause her movement to either slow or she'll stop completely. If too many scary things happen around Fiona, she can also enter a state of panic, at which point she will begin behaving erratically, and visibility on the screen will be diminished. She'll start moving without your input. She won't listen to your inputs sometimes. This is very rare, but things can happen to make her go into that. Though the most important mechanic and the most unique mechanic in Haunting Ground is the ability to give commands to Huey. Now, Huey is able to bite enemies to hold them in place. He can attack them. He can retrieve items that Fiona can't get to. He can access areas that are too small for Fiona, etc., etc. Now, the reason this is so interesting is because at the start of the game, Huey is not super obedient and does not obey Fiona's commands every time. There is an in-game trust-building mechanic between Fiona and Huey. So praising him after he does something good and scolding him if he doesn't obey will raise his affection for Fiona, as well as like giving him food and petting him and stuff like that. And the more affection he has for Fiona, the more likely he will listen to what she tells him to do. Trust can also be lowered by letting him take too much damage, though, which is an unfortunate part because you don't have control of Huey, and if an enemy gets close, he will attack them unless you like actively call him to get the hell away from it. And the reason I say there aren't very many normal enemies in Haunting Ground is because throughout the game, Fiona will find herself being chased by various pursuers. There are 4 in total, though as far as I am aware, the last one has like 3 stages. I don't know. I didn't get that far. Each one has their own section of the game, and their section ends with a boss fight against that pursuer, at which point they are gone. These characters will chase Fiona through different areas and can only be avoided by either managing to knock them out, which is not as easy as it sounds like it would be, or by hiding until they leave to look for you elsewhere. In my opinion, this mechanic starts out very scary, and then it gets really, really, really annoying very quickly. Because they can appear at random times. They have the ability to hear you moving around. Imagine Mr. X, but always and way harder to avoid.
It sure sounds rough.
Haha. So the questions become, why has Fiona found herself in this castle and how can she escape? What is up with the castle's mysterious and sometimes seemingly monstrous residents? And who is the mastermind behind the whole thing? Not to mention, why does everybody seem to be obsessed with either her womb or the idea of getting her pregnant? That's weird. So here's where I'll ask, what are your experiences with Haunting Ground?
I feel like it's a game that I've heard you bring up on this show quite a few times. You played it pretty recently, if memory serves, and you used some cheat codes, it sounds like, very justifiably. I had no idea about the game's narrative theming here, or even that you had a dog and it's a dog mechanic, but it sure sounds like there's a reason why it did not catch on and become a Capcom running IP.
So the first time I think I would have mentioned it would have been in the Clock Tower episode, because it is largely seen as a spiritual successor to Clock Tower.
That sounds about right, yeah.
So yes, I did play it recently, I did use cheats, and I didn't finish it, because I got to the third pursuer, who is a man named Ricardo, and Ricardo has a gun. And he's a bad shot with that gun, but it doesn't matter, because if he hits you with a shot, you die. Instantly. So that's when I decided I didn't want to play Haunting Ground anymore. So I did not finish it. I think it is a really interesting game from a historical standpoint and a theming standpoint and just in the way it's put together. I'll get into this later, but like it's become a game that a lot of gaming scholars like to look at and sort of study how it did some of the things that it did. But it is not a game I would say like people should rush and go play themselves. I don't think it's very good. It kind of sucks. I'm not going to lie. Which bums me out because I really, really want to know more about it in terms of like playing it myself, but I just could not. Man, why would you give him a gun? Screw you. Why would you give him a gun? Now, Haunting Ground is one of the weirder projects that Capcom produced in the PS2 era. Remember, this was back when Capcom was allowed to make games that weren't called Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, or Street Fighter. An era long gone. Nowadays. Not really, they get to make other stuff, but it's mostly those 3 nowadays. Haunting Ground itself is kind of a largely forgotten part of Capcom's history in general. I've never been able to actually find a source for this, including when I was researching it this time, but I have heard multiple people over the years claim that Haunting Ground is one of the many games that started as Resident Evil 4, and then was changed into another property, much the same way that Devil May Cry was. Again, never found sources on that, but that's what people say, I guess. That's the rumor, the theory. What we do know for sure, though, is that the team behind the game specifically wanted to make a survival horror game with a female lead character, something that they believed was not really common at that point, despite the fact that Silent Hill 3 had already come out with Cheryl Mason. You had Nintendo's Eternal Darkness, the entire Clock Tower series. And Resident Evil starring Jill Valentine, produced by Capcom. So, I don't know why they figured that was like the big thing, but that's what they decided they wanted to do. So, they did it. But this was back in the day when it was even worse than it is today, where they were afraid that if it was just a female main character, well, that would turn off some players as well as some retailers. Like, they're not going to want to buy the game, because that's video games, baby. And this is what led to the inclusion of Huey. They figured having a dog partner that could attack enemies would help attract more players. And after adding Huey, that's how they kind of decided to lean into designing the game's mechanics around telling him what to do and using him as your main source of being able to fight back the pursuers. And so they came up with the trusted command systems. Major inspiration for the game's tone and aesthetic was taken from the Universal monster franchises, specifically Boris Karloff's Frankenstein and Bela Lugosi's Dracula. And the thing that I found the weirdest, so the game's cinematics and motion capture were managed by Japanese actor Naoto Takenaka. He also served for the motion actor for the character Ricardo, so he's the one I can blame for the gun. But the reason I mention this is that we might not know who Naoto Takenaka is, but upon looking into him just on a whim, I learned that he is the Japanese dub voice for Nick Fury in the MCU. He was the Japanese dub voice for both Val Kilmer and George Clooney in their respective Batman films. He's the Japanese voice of Entei in the third Pokemon movie. He's Puss in Boots from the Shrek series and Diego from Ice Age. He's also a huge actor in Japanese films and television, as well as being in 2 RGG games, being Binary Domain and Ryuga Gotoku Kenzan. He also used to direct films that went from 1991 to 2009, and he used to do music from 1984 to 2000. So he had his fingers in a lot of pies, and he was a very big figure in Japanese media, and I don't know how Capcom got him to do motion capture for their PlayStation 2 horror game, because as far as I could tell, it's the only time he's ever done anything like that.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the Ryuga Gotoku connection. It sounds a lot like Judgment, when you get like a notable actor in Japan like that to do our video game. Like, it's an interesting pull. And then especially when it's not even a main character. That's, you said, what's the antagonist for like the third part of the game?
And like in 2005 too.
Yeah, all the more recent, yeah.
Judgment's a good comparison, but it's not nearly as surprising because that's just a thing that happens now. Actors get cast as game characters all the time, but in 2005, that unheard of, essentially. So, while Capcom has never stated as such, like I said, many people consider Haunting Ground to be the spiritual successor to the Clock Tower franchise. At that point, the most recent of which Capcom had actually developed and published alongside Sunsoft just 3 years before, being Clock Tower 3, and it's easy to see why. It shares a lot of the same mechanics in terms of hiding from a pursuer, you're playing as a female character, and it also happens to, when I checked into it, share a writer with Clock Tower 3, being Noboru Sugimura, so the games were both written roughly by the same people. Got mixed reviews back in the day, as I'm sure you can imagine. It's got a 67 on Metacritic. Largely, critics panned the hide-and-run gameplay to be very derivative of games like Clock Tower, though critics really couldn't agree on whether or not the dog training mechanics were good or if they were very repetitive and kind of sucked. I never had a huge problem with it, but it is kind of like, it's an escort mission where your escort is the only one who can fight. And it's weird. I don't think it's bad. I just think they were kind of ahead of their time on that one and not in the best way they could have been. But it did overall get praised for its visuals and atmosphere. And honestly, I will say the game is actually really good looking for a PlayStation 2 game. I'm not going to lie. And the atmosphere and the setting are all very interesting and good. And it's an interesting game in so many ways. Unfortunately, and I don't know how this happened, I don't know what Capcom was thinking, its fate was that it was released just a few months after, and therefore got heavily compared to Capcom's own Resident Evil 4.
Oops.
So, and compared to Resident Evil 4, oh yeah, Haunting Ground is definitely gonna get some mixed reception on that one. I genuinely don't understand what they were thinking with that. That seems like such a stupid idea. Though Haunting Ground has kind of become a relatively interesting game for people to look back on, and it's the subject of a lot of studies, mostly due to its themes and how it works with them. Largely the sexual objectification themes that are surrounding Fiona and her pursuer's motives for chasing her. Like I said, one of them literally just wants to use her as like a doll, like a play thing, a Barbie doll, basically. Generally, this game is considered to be a really good example of sexualization of a female main character being used in a thematically appropriate way. Because Fiona's design is one of the main things that are pointed to. Her outfit being a very short skirt and a sweater with a large amount of open area on the back. And of course, her breasts are very programmed for physics. And it's kind of the point is the weird part, because obviously in the universe, she didn't pick out these clothes. The people that are being creepy picked out the clothes for her. She really didn't have a choice. And so it builds into that theming of she's kind of having her autonomy taken away from her, etc., etc. And so critics have sort of looked at it as this really, really good example of using this kind of character design as a way to help make the player feel a bit more vulnerable and highlight the themes of the whole thing that Fiona is going through. Do I think that Capcom did that on purpose? It's hard to tell, I'll be real, but I guess we can give them the benefit of the doubt. It's also been praised for its attempt and ability to take the idea of a character like Fiona being a sex object for the enjoyment of the player, and instead turns it around and puts the player in the place of being the sex object in the eyes of other characters in the game, which is something that not a lot of games manage to pull off well.
Yeah, I feel like this whole thing overall, it's like an interesting idea that they tried, and I just don't know if at this point in time would have been like the most tactful experience or like the most deftly handled. I mean, I feel like maybe it's, we take games more seriously now, maybe more open to discussion now, but also you could see people missing the point and attacking the game if it were out today entirely.
I could see that. But it has been the subject of multiple studies, mostly about the relationship between players and the character that they are currently playing as, which is actually one of the only reasons that anybody remembers Haunting Ground at all, if I had to take a guess. Haunting Ground got re-released in Japan as a PS2 classic on the PS3 in 2015, but that is the only time and place it's ever been re-released in any form. Never been re-released in the West, never been re-released again in Japan at all. So, that's another reason why people don't know about it. They've never put it back out. Though it has made some appearances in the years since it came out, despite being a very obscure Capcom title. For instance, Fiona appears as a character card in 2006's SNK vs. Capcom Card Fighters DS. The one I knew but didn't know the details about, Fiona, Huey, and Debilitas appear as a cameo in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom Ultimate All-Stars as part of Joe the Condor's arcade mode ending, where he rescues Fiona and Huey from Debilitas before blowing the castle up with a missile. And at the end, Fiona and Huey can be seen being comforted by June the Swan after their traumatic experience, while Ken the Eagle yells at Joe about, like, you can't just blow everything up. That's not how you solve problems.
I feel like, playing that game and getting that ending, I must have experienced it, but had no idea who those characters were.
That checks out, honestly. Though most recently, and most shockingly to me, Cammy got a Fiona costume in Street Fighter V, and that was like 2 years ago.
Okay.
So Capcom still remembers that Haunting Ground exists. They just don't do anything with it. She is yet to show up in Capcom's mobile card game Teppen, which is super weird because from what I hear about that game, Capcom is already scraping the bottom of the barrel for characters to put in there. Based on a podcast I listened to where one of them plays Teppen, there are characters from Resident Evil that show up for 10 minutes in their respective game and they have a card. And Haunting Ground is nowhere in there. So that's weird, but also, again, not crazy surprising. So, for the main composer of Haunting Ground, we're going to talk about Seiko Kobuchi. So she was born October 31st, 1973, in Nishinomiya, Hyogo Prefecture, Japan. That's right, she was born on Halloween.
Woo!
Spooky season delivers, baby. She started in games at Konami in 1997, but she left the company in 1999 to join Capcom the following year in 2000. And then she left Capcom in 2008 to go freelance shortly after she started working on Resident Evil 5. She was able to complete 2 tracks for RE5 before she left, and the rest of the soundtrack was picked up by Kota Suzuki, who we talked about in episode 94 for his work on Devil May Cry 5, and Hideki Okugawa, who we talked about in episode 143 for his work on Dead Rising. She was a member of the group Gaon Dan, alongside multiple other ex-Capcom composers, but apparently this group has since disbanded. I don't know what this means, but I couldn't not include this for some reason. She produced and sang the 2008 commercial song for Japanese donut brand Mr. Donut. I tried so hard to find this song. I could not. I wanted to find it so bad. But man, that's, I think, 2 spooky seasons in a row where somebody has written a jingle for something. No, that would have been 2 years ago. The RE7 guy and how he wrote the Kit Kat.
Oh yeah, that's right. I feel like Mr. Donut would be a brand in Japan where they'd hire an American celebrity to do some weird
it sounds
commercial.
Like it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like Tommy Lee Jones, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Bruce Willis. He's the popular one right now, I believe. In terms of her discography, she did some arcade games like Solar Assault. She also did the Game Boy Color soundtrack for Tokimeki Memorial Pocket, as well as the soundtrack for NBA In the Zone. She's uncredited, but did the soundtrack for the Game Boy Advance game Final Fight 1. She did the music for Resident Evil 0, Disney's Magical Mirror starring Mickey Mouse. She's one of the composers credited on Mega Man X7, as well as the Game Boy Advance version of Disney's Aladdin, Haunting Ground, of course, Mega Man Maverick Hunter X, and she did the 8-bit stuff in Zack and Wiki Quest for Barbarossa's Treasure.
Oh, yeah.
But only the 8-bit stuff, according to Moby Games. Again, she did 2 tracks for Resident Evil 5, and then most recently, she was a guest artist on the Mega Man 10 Arranged soundtrack, where she specifically did the arrangement of the song No Turning Back. She doesn't seem to work in games super often nowadays, as far as I can tell. So in terms of the Haunting Ground soundtrack itself, the music was, of course, composed by Seiko Kobuchi, but also Shinya Okada. And I'm sorry, Mr. Okada-san, every track I picked to highlight was composed by Seiko Kobuchi. Not a single one from Okada-san made it in there. I apologize. That was not on purpose. Though, something really, really interesting about this soundtrack, it is not actually streaming off of the disc, like most music in that era would have been. It is actually being generated directly using the PS2's built-in sound functions. And the reason they did this was because they wanted to be able to change the tempo on the fly during gameplay. And you can actually see this in action constantly in the game, because when you are being chased by a pursuer, the music gets louder and faster the closer they are to you.
That's wild.
And it's really neat. It's a really, really neat way to do things. So that's super interesting. And I don't think I've read about another PS2 game that does it that way. So that's neat. Anyways, let's get into the 5 critical tracks for Haunting Ground. The first of which is the opening cinematic. This is Endless Demento. Again, this is the opening cinematic, which is a FMV video, as they usually were on the PlayStation 2. And I think it's a really good sort of introduction to the general feeling of Haunting Ground, being that it has this very, very creepy feeling to it, using these sort of chimes, at least in the intro. But it also has this sort of feeling of almost camp in a lot of ways. 'Cause, like, all of the villains in Haunting Ground are cartoonishly evil. And it adds, like, this weird air to it. But also, boy, you can tell in later parts of the piece that this is a composer that had previously worked on Resident Evil.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause it is very Resident Evil in certain parts, too. And that later bits with, like, all the fast beat and the more electronic feeling, that's a little bit more like what you'll hear throughout the rest of the soundtrack of Haunting Ground.
Feels a little bit, early Devil May Cry.
Yeah.
Like, to me, so.
Which, I mean, if it's true that this also started as Resident Evil 4, that works, I guess.
All makes sense, right? So there's definitely the connection there. But yeah, what a shift. And I feel like it does both of these well. Interesting to hear, like, the instrument choices with that kind of limitation. I would not have thought that. Yeah, I would have thought, at this point, like, oh, we're doing streaming off, the DVD ROM and all that. But that's really interesting. And I'm sure we'll hear more on, like, the pursuit themes and all that, especially how that factors in. But neat to hear this as a starting song. Did not expect the faster electronic shift.
It just jumps right into it.
But, if it's an opening cinematic, they gotta, hype you up and get ready to play the game.
Yeah, that's true. But the opposite of hyping you up is critical track number 2. This is Precious Huey. So from what I can tell, this is like the most popular song in the game. Or at least one of the most well-known among the fan base. It is Huey's theme, if you didn't guess. I think the main reason that it's supposed to be sort of this calm music box piece is that for Fiona in universe, like, Huey's kind of a grounding presence, a haunting grounding presence. And so, like, having this partner alongside her kind of helps her keep her head in place and stuff like that. And I think that's what this song is mainly supposed to represent. The first time you meet Huey, he is, like, caught in a bear trap. And Fiona gets him out, and he just follows her around from there. And they stick together throughout the entire game. And this song, I think, is a very good representation of sort of that mutual relationship of trust and helping that they develop over time.
He looks like such a good boy. On the video version of the episode, you see we have the soundtrack art for the album in there. And Huey looks like this white German shepherd, and he looks adorable. It's nice to have a simple little theme like this with like a good melody to it, and I feel like that's really effective.
He is a good boy until he decides, I'm going to keep, like, I know Fiona is hiding right now, but I'm going to keep biting Debilitas so he stays in this area for the rest of time.
Huey.
Damn, his AI is not great. His AI is not very good. It's very PS2, let's put it that way. So let's talk about one of the Pursuit themes, and my personal favorite Pursuit theme of the 4. I think there might be 5, I don't know. This is critical track number 3, Something Lacking. So this is the pursuit track for the second pursuer, being Daniela, the maid. Daniela is a homunculus, an artificial human being who has been told that she is not a real woman because she is lacking something. And it's pretty heavily implied to be that she is lacking the innards, most notably a womb. She is very cold and emotionless and super weird, except when she snaps and laughs super creepily, which, when she does that, she has the ability to potentially launch Fiona into panic mode. I like this one the best simply because I think it being like this really industrial sounding thing really helps reflect that she's not a real person. She's essentially an automaton, like made out of who knows what, but she's a homunculus. She's not real. And also, the song sounds positively unhinged, which is perfect for her, because the first thing she does when she starts pursuing you is break a mirror with her face and then chase you through the castle with a shard of that mirror. So that's cool. You can also, during her pursuit sections, just walk into a room and she'll just be cleaning it. And if you you can interact with her and she'll be like, "Excuse me, sorry, it's cleaning time right now." And then you can just leave. It's really weird. She's super bizarre. You can hear a little bit in there about how the song is like kind of constantly changing tempo. And again, that is, it gets louder and faster the closer that she is to you, or depending on whether or not she knows where you are.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was certainly going to point that out. You can definitely hear in the clip how that kind of ramps up a little bit and then kind of fades back down. Very unsettling, but a really cool choice. And we were talking about like, what kind of instruments are they going to use when you're kind of using the built-in PlayStation 2 audio? Oh yeah, something like artificial, housey, kind of gets you going there. That's really neat. Very industrial. It's a good way to describe it. Yep.
Critical track number 4. This is a weird one. Mostly because of the thing that I couldn't help but learn while looking into it. This is critical track number 4, Final Lorenzo. Lorenzo is the main antagonist of Haunting Ground. Quote, he is the aforementioned pervert that owns the castle. But he is, from what I can tell, his plot is there is something in Fiona's womb that she inherited from her dad, who is technically his son, kind of. And he wants it to, like, give himself eternal life and eternal youth and etc., etc. I don't know. I believe, as far as I can tell, this is the music for the final boss, if not the final pursuit, I guess. I really like that one of the instrumentations they use seems to be a woman screaming, like with a heavy amount of reverb to it, which I think gives it a really creepy air. And, you know, that succeeds at that. One thing I did learn from the YouTube comments is apparently Lorenzo, when he's young, is very hot. That's all the comments are talking about. That's it.
It's been a long time since I've read the word smexy on the internet, but it's there. You're right.
That's all they're talking about, is that this character is hot. And knowing what I know about him, that's weird. But all right. I think one of the comments was something like, "Oh, I showed my friends this game and they didn't think he was hot, and now we aren't talking." It's like, what has happened? What? All of you go to therapy, please.
Why is this game dividing friendships based on that? Yeah, I think it's a good representation for a final boss. It has that tension for sure. I think you're right. I like something lacking the Daniela Pursuit theme more, but this is good, and it represents a key point of the game to sum it all up.
Yeah, I think it is a very neat sort of final theme for whatever it is. I don't know if it's a boss. I don't know if he's just chasing you through a hallway. I have no idea. I didn't make it that far, and I don't care to. But it's a pretty interesting song. And critical track number 5, this is the credits theme, apparently. This is Endless Zero. There's another very creepy sounding piece that definitely fits the tone and feeling of Haunting Ground in general. There are multiple endings in this game. All of them, except for the bad ending, are Fiona leaves and gets away, whether Huey is with her or not.
Aww.
I believe there's only one ending where Huey is not with her, and if Huey's not with her, I actually believe that might automatically trigger the bad ending, now that I think about it, because the triggering event that causes the bad ending is that Huey is not there to save her from something.
Got it.
But this song has like these very creepy, haunting vocals to them, which are apparently Seiko Kobuchi herself, which is really neat. So they didn't hire a vocalist; she just did it herself, and I admire that. That's really cool. I think this song is neat. I'm sad that I will never hear it in context, but also I don't care.
Yeah, it's really neat, and I do like the vocals as well. I just don't get end credits vibes from it, and I don't know if that makes sense, but I suppose it could work, but especially if you've escaped, maybe you need something a little more positive, but I do think it is fitting with all the instruments that they've shown on the soundtrack so far. All the chimes and everything, yeah.
I feel like it's a lot more fitting than what Resident Evil would get eventually, or got before this.
Sure, or I also think like I Am the Wind from Symphony of the Night, like that kind of tonal whiplash. Yeah, sure.
So it could be worse. I think it overall fit. It reminds me a lot of the credits theme of Resident Evil Village, actually, and the tone that song has. Okay. So, yeah. All right, tracks of the cutting room floor. Let's bring our cool maid friend back for a second to talk about the first track being Last Daniela. So this plays during Daniela's boss fight. Now, a very cool thing about at least the first 3 boss fights of the game, the first 3 pursuers, they all have the same song, except it's that song with their pursuit theme mixed in some fashion. So you can, in this song, you can hear bits and pieces of something lacking in the song there, but if it's Last Habilitas, that would be replaced with his pursuit theme and pieces there, and Ricardo's as well. And I think it's really, really neat the way they do that. But again, I think Daniela gets the best treatment in terms of music in general, and I think her version is the best version in general.
Sounds like if you're mixing up Devil May Cry with something like the Psycho Mantis theme from Metal Gear Solid, sounds like a neat blending of those two. I dig it. Yeah,
I dig it a lot. And it still keeps that sort of gothic castle feeling while maintaining the mechanical feeling of Daniela's music. I think it's neat.
100%.
The other track of the cutting room floor is another pursuit theme, but it's mostly here because this one is hilarious to me. It's the funniest track in the game, and that would be Sly Hunter. This is Ricardo's pursuit theme. Why does it have a club beat? Why does it sound like that?
So is this the song that was playing when you decided to drop the game?
I guess. I don't remember it, but I feel like I would. It's so stupid sounding.
I'm glad you put it in here. It sounds special and fun.
Why's it gotta sound like that? And why'd they give him a gun? But yeah, that's mostly there because when it came up while I was listening through the soundtrack, I could not hold back from laughing. It is absolutely hilarious and in a lot of ways makes Ricardo completely impossible to take seriously, despite the fact that he is actually like the secondary main antagonist of the entire game, apparently.
They gave him a gun because the bass in the trance music would muffle the Shada sound effect.
And I think this one's also a little bit easier to hear the tempo changes in because the beat is so pronounced. So there's that too, I guess. But it's mostly there because they gave him a club beat. So what will I never forget about Haunting Ground? I think this game is fascinating in its existence in a lot of ways, but oh my god, don't play it. Do not play it. Do not play this game. It's not good. It's not worth your time. Maybe if one day they remade it, but also don't do that. But like, that's the only way I can think of that would make me want to try playing this game again. Ricardo killed it for me completely. And, yeah, the fact that even with cheats to make myself completely invisible, make myself mostly impervious to damage, and a bunch of other stuff, like I still gave up because of the mechanics of something that was killing me, that says something, and I just don't play it. Go look into it. Don't play it.
Yeah, it sounds like an interesting relic of its time, especially with, the dog companion effects and all that. But yeah, I think at some point there may be some game that tackles this kind of subject matter again in a better, more progressive and modern way. But it's going to take a special kind of control and a steady hand to maneuver carefully around all that. Because, yeah, I mean, when you have a medium that's growing and has an adult audience, or you can cater it to an adult audience, you can tackle these things. I mean, films do, but I just don't know if are we there yet in games to handle that subject matter appropriately.
But the fact that this game managed to do it in a way that people still look back and go like, actually, it kind of did that pretty well, is shocking.
in a time, where you had other games that could be seen as not handling the subject of women and their bodies and all that. Yeah.
The era of One Chambara.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, it's just an interesting relic of Capcom history that I'm glad they don't seem to have completely forgotten, despite the fact that that costume on Cammy looks terrible. It's clipping into itself the whole time. It looks awful. But that's because Street Fighter V is ugly as sin, and Street Fighter 6, thank God, looks better. Oh my God, it looks so much better. But yeah, look at it. Don't play it. It's a museum. It's a museum exhibit, not a video game you want to play. So for our transition, we like to highlight a fan cover, fan remix. I did not expect to find anything from this game, but I did actually find a couple of things, including what is referred to as an epic cover of Precious Huey by the YouTuber Rod Harold. That's Herold. And it's honestly pretty good. Translates to guitar very, very well, which I guess shouldn't be that surprising. Music box and acoustic guitar aren't too far away from each other. And it's just really good and nice. So please enjoy that, and we will be right back.
Epic cover is right of that Precious Huey song, but even more precious is the husky that is featured in that video. So go check out that Rod Harold YouTube account for that video. That's really cute. Let's talk about Persona 5 Royal. I feel like when we brought this game up as being on the best of 2020, it was a point of discussion and contention where it's like, really, we know how great the original Persona 5 soundtrack is, right? But it had to be me going, no, you don't understand. They added significantly more music to this game to make up for the additional third semester of school time that you play as. And those tracks alone are worthy of getting in the best of 2020. So I think it's finally time to bring it to the show because Persona 5 Royal is about to become back on the gaming scene in at least a semi-notable way. Of course, we have endless episodes talking about Persona. It's like, these guys are covering another Persona game. Really? You know, it's only among, the best soundtracks in gaming. I mean, that's just what we believe, but I think it's most important to talk about how on episode 61 of the show, that was when we discussed the original Persona 5. And that was actually just before this game, Persona 5 Royal, launched in the West. So late March 2020, because Persona 5 The Royal released on PlayStation 4 in Japan on October 31st, 2019, Halloween, spooky season, as it goes. But then the rest of the world got the game as Persona 5 Royal on March 31st, 2020. The game is finally coming to PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, Nintendo Switch, and PC this Friday, October 21st, 2022. Where would you get to play it? What's the easiest way to play it? If you have Xbox Game Pass, it's included in Game Pass, so definitely give it a shot there if you have not tried Persona 5 Royal. It's a bit of a pain if you have the original game, though, on PS4, because there is no upgrade path for the PlayStation 5 version. Thanks, Sega. Thanks, Atlus. What are you thinking? The game is developed by Atlus's P Studio team, and for Royal, it was published by Sega. The acquisition had occurred by that point between Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal. Persona 5, we've discussed before. It's a JRPG that combines role-playing, social simulation, and dungeon crawling mechanics. During the daytime, you are a high school student that is trying to make friends and grow personal attributes. But at night, you and your friends summon supernatural manifestations of your personality, known as persona, to battle demons that represent the wicked nature of humanity. Now, this royal version is basically the director's cut. It's the definitive edition of the original 2017 game, and it features an additional Phantom Thief member named Kasumi Yoshizawa. There is a playable third semester, so a whole bunch more time and new plot elements that go along with that. There's a new area of the city in Kichijoji, which it's interesting to watch the reveal trailer for that. It was played at a Persona 5 or a Persona music concert. And when that trailer plays and you get the crowd audience reacting oh, it's weird to see how they know what city it's riffing on. So it's just an interesting little aspect, I think, I remember of the game's marketing. There is also new music, as you mentioned. That's why we're bringing it to the show. There are additional confidant social links to go along with all the additional plot. There's support for the PlayStation 4 Pro, including 4K graphics, still running at 30 at the time, but now the new editions, at least on the new Xbox Series consoles, on PlayStation 5, you get the 4K 60 bump. There are just many other changes and additions along with it, to the point where if you're playing Persona 5 for the first time, just play Royal. Don't look back at the original. This is the best way to play the game. The plot of Persona 5 Royal. You play as a protagonist that you name, but he's referred to other characters in the game as Joker. He is a transfer student at Shujin Academy in modern-day Tokyo after you've been accused of a false assault charge. Joker is eventually drawn into the Velvet Room, where he is granted access to a supernatural mobile app that leads him to an alternate reality called the Metaverse, which, boy, that's a little weird looking back on, and people trying to make the most of the Metaverse today. And
yeah, that means a little bit of a different thing since the original Persona 5 came out. Oh boy.
It sure does. In the Metaverse, Joker meets Morgana, a cat-like creature who informs him of the ability to change wicked people's hearts by stealing their treasure, which is the emotional root of their behavior, from the palaces that are ruled by their shadow selves. For example, in school, an abusive volleyball teacher named Kamoshida considers himself the king of the school, so Joker, his classmate Ryuji, and Morgana form the Phantom Thieves of Heart to infiltrate Kamoshida's castle palace and rehabilitate his heart. Big questions here. Who will join the Phantom Thieves in their quest? Can they stop the murders that have been taking place throughout Tokyo? And what is the truth behind the Metaverse, especially as it has been adapted in this Royal edition? So, Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Persona 5 Royal?
I bought it on PS4 when it came out, making it the second time that I bought Persona 5. Did not play it. I think something else had come out around the same time, and I was just playing other games.
It was a couple weeks after the back-to-back of Animal Crossing New Horizons and Doom Eternal.
Animal Crossing would have been the one. That's what probably would have stopped it. I have already pre-ordered it on Switch. I will be picking it up on Friday. So there's that. That'll be the third time I bought Persona 5. And honestly, playing this game on Switch feels like it is the perfect play. Persona was made for portability. All of it.
100%.
The whole series. And it's about time that it is coming to Switch. Oh man, it is about time.
I'm really excited for you to give it a shot on Switch. I unfortunately will not be, playing it for a third time because, I played Persona 5 at launch. I bought and played Persona 5 Royal at launch. I'm even watching my fiance play Persona 5 Royal. She's going through it right now. She's 30 hours in. She's at just about to finish the third palace, the bank. So I'm super proud of her. It's been really neat to see her play it because that was, really close to like the beginning of our relationship and COVID and all that and quarantine. So she had watched me play the game, lots of naps and cute couch time throughout, but to have her play it now and for me to watch her and experience it that way, again, it's really neat.
Who's she dating?
Well, have not gotten that far yet, but I'm pretty sure she remembers me dating Makoto, and then when she goes through and has, Makoto being the narc for reasons early on, a little annoyed by her at the moment, but I think we were turning around on her slightly. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. I don't think I'll be picking it up, but I can imagine that, yeah, as much as I loved Persona 4 Golden on PlayStation Vita, and even when I was playing both Persona 5 and Royal, I would do some remote play to Vita just to have it. Yeah, it's going to be perfect. I really am excited for you and other people to get to play this game wherever they get to play it, whether it's through Game Pass or on Switch. It's a really fun time, and Royal, all they changed for it, clearly the best version of the game. So as far as like the development and themes, if you wanted to listen to the Persona 5 episode 61, go check that out. Like, that's all about like what went into the original Persona 5. But as far as development history for this game, the game was greenlit in 2017. So only a few months after it released. I believe it was at the end of 2016 in Japan. For what it's worth, they were considering a couple themes of what's the definitive edition. And for Persona 4, it was Persona 4 The Golden. For this game, they were considering Royal, but also Gorgeous was considered as a possible name. So Persona 5 The Gorgeous, and that was apparently recommended by composer Shoji Meguro. So Atlus eventually teased the game as Persona 5R in both December 2018 and March 2019, and this was following the airing of Persona 5 the animation. They had a couple OVAs that came out, original video animations, and so they were kind of little tags at the end just to be like, hey, this is a thing, Persona 5R, with the full reveal, as I mentioned, being in April 2019 at the Persona Super Live concert. I remember watching that live on a bootleg live stream, and that was a really cool moment. I really remember that. In a first for the series, Royal featured subtitles in French, German, Italian, and Spanish. For the 2022 remaster that's just about to come out, simplified Chinese subtitles will be available in the game. Now, when it comes to how they marketed, do you want to buy this game again, owners of Persona 5? Well, they made all of the DLC from the original game available as a free download for all owners of Persona 5 Royal. Royal, on top of that, because it was a video game in 2020, had more DLC packs on top of it that you could pay for. These included costumes based on the characters that had games released since the original Persona 5. So there were characters from Persona 5 Dancing in Starlight, Persona Q2 New Cinema Labyrinth, and Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey Redux, as well as all of the characters from the Velvet Room. All of this paid DLC that was created for Royal will be included for free in the new 2022 remaster version. So you're getting it all. It's truly Royal Deluxe. Persona 5 Royal is the third best reviewed PlayStation 4 game of all time, according to Metacritic, behind Rockstar's masterpieces of Red Dead Redemption 2 and Grand Theft Auto 5, with a score of 95. This beats Persona 5's 7th place 93 mark. There were many things praised in the game, including the art direction, the graphical style, the battle system, the voice cast, and the soundtrack. Script localization and LGBT portrayal issues, which were concerns from the original game, were adjusted. If anything, I think the big flaw of the game now is that it may be too long. It's just a very, very long game. When I played it on the easiest difficulty, it still took me like 82 hours. So it's a beefy boy, that one. But Michael Higgum of GameSpot noted in his review that Royal refines an already great game and builds on what was best about it. with a great new story, and that it is an unforgettable and empowering RPG that should be recognized as one of the best games of our time. As of June 2021, Persona 5 has sold over 5 million copies worldwide, including 1.8 million Royal copies, sure to grow with this coming release here. There were not as many awards for Royal as the original, which makes sense with its director's cut status, but Persona 5 Royal won the award for Best Music at the Famitsu Dengeki Game Awards 2019, where it was also nominated for Best RPG. It was nominated for Best Role-Playing Game at the Game Awards 2020, but it lost out to Final Fantasy VII Remake. As far as the legacy of Persona since Royal, we're all on pins and needles for whatever the next Persona game announcement will be, especially when we talked, several months ago of in October, they're going to have that Persona Super Live concert. And, in the past, that's generally when they talk about Persona game projects. And, they have the 25th anniversary that they've been hyping up this year for Persona. So maybe we'll get something. Well, a couple weeks ago, they had that concert go by. And a couple weeks before even that, they had to make an announcement and say that, no such news is going to happen. No game announcements are coming from this concert. Thanks. Happy anniversary, Persona. So we'll see whenever Persona 6 even gets teased, or if they're going to do another fighting game spinoff, maybe another ArcSys game. Who knows?
I would love to see an ArcSys game. I want Persona 5 Arena, but at this point, ArcSys is making everything under the sun, so who knows?
We've talked about plenty of composers, musicians, and the like throughout our times covering Persona games, so it was a little tough to find a stretch of who are we going to talk about. Let's talk about Shigeo Komori this week. Unfortunately, there is not much out there for Shigeo Komori on the internet. I highlight him because he is a lyricist in this game. But it turns out he is much more than that, because predominantly he is the director for what seems to be most of, if not all, the Etrian Odyssey series. And most recently, he was the game director of Shin Megami Tensei 5. He was the scenario writer for Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne and Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner Raido Kuzunoha versus the Soulless Army. As far as his lyrics work, he was a lyricist for Persona 3 on the songs Burn My Dread. He helped a little bit on the P3 FES original OP song for that game, and he also did the lyrics for Memories of You, the ending theme. Similarly, for Persona 4, he did the lyrics for Nevermore, that game's ending theme, and for Persona 5, he did the lyrics for Our Light, which is that game's ending theme. He also did lyrics work on Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor 2 Record Breaker and Etrian Odyssey 2 Untold, The Fafnir Night. So, yeah, seemingly a producer at Atlas that also dabbles in writing lyrics, and that's pretty neat. When it comes to the historical development research for the Persona 5 Royal soundtrack, there are 29 new songs added in this version of the game, with a few overlaying gameplay sections from the original game. Music is primarily composed by Shoji Meguro, who we covered on episode 3 of the show, and Toshiki Konishi, who we covered on episode 61 for his work on Persona Q, though it should be noted that Konishi had a bigger work composing music in this game, in Royal, than he did with the original Persona 5. There are some additional tracks composed by Atsushi Kitajo, covered him in episode 179, Kenichi Tsuchiya, who we covered in episode 146, he and Tsukasa Masuko, they are from the original Shin Megami Tensei game. One of their tracks gets brought into, I think it's the darts mini game. It's like a song from there gets brought in there. And then Ryota Kozuka has one of his songs from the Persona 3 and Persona 5 dancing games. Has that brought into this game in a unique way as well. Should have mentioned we were going to talk about Ryota Kozuka this week. It was the plan. We talked about at the end of, what are we doing next week? Well, Ryota Kozuka, we were going to talk about his work on Persona 4 Dancing All Night. And then we kind of realized, like, after Persona 4 and Persona 3 got official releases for, next generations and all that in January.
On the same day as Fire Emblem, of all things.
Oh, yeah. Fire Emblem Engage. That's a lot of JRPGs to drop on one day. So, we're going to talk and wait to cover Mr. Kozuka and his work on Persona 4 Dancing All Night. We're going to wait until that week. So that's why if Persona 5 Royal is coming out, let's finally get to talking about these Royal tracks. And as we mentioned before, of course, what did Shigeo Komori do? He wrote the lyrics for the end credits theme called Our Light. The original Japanese title is Hoshito Bokurato, and that translates out fairly well. Unfortunately, this song did not make the cut. There are a lot of great songs specifically in the Royal version of the game. Plenty to highlight. I even stuck you with a couple, so hope you enjoyed that. But yeah, unfortunately, songs like Beneath the Mask, a song that I find very relaxing and soothing and can put me and my fiance to sleep. We covered those in the original Persona 5 game. So they will not be here in that original, they're in the Persona 5 episode. Songs that are from Persona 5 originally will not be here. So let's talk about the 5 critical tracks for songs from Persona 5 Royal. We start with this one, kind of have to start here. This is Colors Flying High. I feel like most of the time, Persona games nail their opening cinematic song. The song that, plays and it has a neat animation to go along with it before you press that A, X button, what have you, and get to the main menu. But that animation that, is there with you every time you boot up the game, this is a good one to go to. And certainly when the game was revealed, this was the song that went along with it. In fact, it was also the first song that was composed for Persona 5 Royal by Shoji Meguro. He did so because they had to have an animation made for it. So, kind of take this royal, gorgeous theme and make a song around it. And that started in around September 2017 when he started to write the song after production had been greenlit. So yeah, the opening cinematic theme before the main menu, it is a catchy animation to go along with it. Got the chorus here that kind of has the little quieter vibe before bringing all the instruments back in. Channels a lot of the da-da-da-da-da, like the jazz hits that really got pronounced in the Persona 5 soundtrack. Great lyrics. Lin Inaizumi crushing it on vocals as she continues to do for Persona 5 projects. Just a great song all around, and one that sticks with you booting up the game. Hopefully will do so as you play this experience.
So I have, unfortunately, what could be seen as a hot take is that I like Wake Up, Get Up, Get Out There better as a song.
Yeah.
In just about every way.
I feel like that song is more emblematic of like a new experience.
It fits the tone and aesthetic of Persona 5 a bit more, which is how I also feel about that's how I feel about Shadow World versus Pursuing My True Self. I think Pursuing My True Self is a better song and also fits better with the tones of Persona 4.
Sure. I feel like that's an interesting comparison point. Yeah, both these are glammed up to be golden or gorgeous. But when you're talking about the root themes of the game, I think you're right. The originals suit that better.
I mean, it's a good song, and like Lin always has, when Lin's involved, it's always great. But yeah, I don't know. I can't not compare it to Wake Up, Get Up, Get Out There. And I don't know. It feels weird in terms of the tone and themes and aesthetic of the game as a whole in general. But that might just be me. I don't know.
Totally fair. Totally fair. Well, this one you're going to hear a lot, especially if you are proficient in the game number 2 on the Critical 5 for Persona 5 Royal. This is Take Over.
We wanna make this party, you don't wanna skip. Gonna be a show to remember. Take over, start to boogie down. Make over, nothing's gonna take away my life. Was over when it started with that shoe that thought one more thing I can't name's over.
If you're an old listener of original Soundchat, you'll remember when this game was coming out and the music, all was kind of rolling out along with it. I had pointed out 2 tracks of like, keep your ears out for these 2, because this makes this soundtrack totally legit, and this is, of course, one of them. Take Over is the main battle theme when you are ambushing an enemy. If you are caught by an enemy, or things aren't going well otherwise, if it's just under normal circumstances, Persona 5's Last Surprise battle theme plays, so you still get that song in this game. But if you're on top of your game and you're ambushing those enemies, you're going to hear this one a lot. Composed by Shoji Meguro, lyrics by Lotus Juice. Yes, the rapper from Persona 3. Great to have his involvement in this game. According to Meguro, quote, "Like the other songs, the concept was gorgeousness. The music for Persona 5 was more modest, a mature acid jazz, so I intentionally didn't use brass instruments. This time, I brought in the brass as well as the strings and made a brighter, livelier track." He sure did. This one goes super well when you're transitioning into all-out attacks. It is so good, so tight that you won't mind getting into battle encounters in the palaces.
This is another direct comparison point that I can point to, as I feel roughly the same as it. Well, not the exact same, but the comparison between Reach Out to the Truth and Time to Make History, where I like Time to Make History better.
So much better. Yeah, same thing there.
But unlike Reach Out to the Truth, which I do still like as a song, Last Surprise never really got grading. But I do think the idea of having 2, maybe 3 different battle themes in an RPG, especially one of the length of Persona 5, is something more games should do. And I'm glad that they embrace them every time they release one of these enhanced versions.
For sure, and you're right, for a game especially as long as Persona 5 Royal, I think it's remarkable that this song does not get old. It just works so well. Number 3 on the Critical 5, let's add some of that new content with the 3rd semester. This song is So Happy World. So I'll still be dancing around spoilers here for not only you, Joe. I don't know how much you've been able to pick up in your...
Very little, surprisingly.
Wow, I'm surprised. Yeah, in the couple years that this game has been out, but also for everyone else who still has yet to play Persona 5 Royal for the first time. Those who have played it, though, would remember that this song is the Tokyo Day theme during the 3rd semester. So if you want to draw back to another... sort of Persona game point, it's kind of like how in Persona 3 you have Memories of the City, and it's kind of like a kind of wistful, somber experience. With this one, it has a bright energy to it, but also not everything is as it seems. For example, if you remember in the pre-release marketing material. Why is Morgana suddenly a human boy? Questions to answer. So I feel like this kind of brings up the mysterious element of this new added third semester, and there are things to figure out in Tokyo, and this gives a good air of ambience to it.
So does this take place in like January?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense, because this feels like it's a lot calmer, but it fits like sort of a wintry mood.
Yes.
A lot. So I was wondering, because otherwise, like, I was going to be like, this does not fit Tokyo streets, but if it's winter, no, this fits completely. Especially if there's snow involved. I don't know if there is, but it's Japan in winter, so it snows there a good amount as far as I'm aware.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this song seems very fitting for that kind of environment.
The other song that I had pointed out in the pre-release hype of Persona 5 Royal was the Takeover. And there's this song, number 4 on the Critical 5 for the game. This is I Believe.
To fight it together, I believe we can fly up in the sky. One day we may just be able to touch down on the star of the road we have to go. The road is past, we shall proceed until the end of the road. There's no turning back for us.
This song is amazing. You may know that Life Will Change from Persona 5 is one of my favorite game music tracks of all time. So if you're trying to take the Life Will Change approach, but for the new final boss encounter of this game, you better have it on an epic scale like this. Now, I still prefer Life Will Change more because it has that kind of sassy attitude of the Phantom Thieves, but this is certainly elevated, especially with the themes that get expressed in this third semester. And it's really neat that you also get, I don't think it's necessarily in the clip, but especially in the beginning of the piece, you get the like the little callback to, like, you're having that same sort of vibe of making the approach to the treasure, so to speak. Just a great song on this one in the build up to that final boss. A really memorable theme, and for the one time you hear it, it works super well.
Yeah, it's also, like you mentioned, when the parts of Life Will Change pop in, like, they're really, really well implemented and really cool. Yeah, no, this song is really cool, and I do like the idea of, hey, yeah, Life Will Change is a really good song, but maybe another song for the last one. Like,
yes.
Maybe a different song to sort of drive home that this is a different one.
Little bigger stakes here.
Yeah, it fits. Like, one of my only complaints aesthetically about the end of the original game is when you're climbing the tree thing. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
When you get into boss fights, the music, like, it's not Life Will Change anymore, which it should just be that song throughout the entire thing, even during fights.
Completely, yes.
Aesthetically, that's what makes sense, but they don't do that. But yeah, like, that's the logical conclusion of where Life Will Change plays. So, you know, putting another song there fits very well.
It sure does. And to wrap up the Critical 5 for Persona 5 Royal, it has to be Throw Away Your Mask.
But it doesn't have to be like this. Don't sleep through dreams that can't come true. No more tears shall drop from your cheeks anymore. You want me to strive for greatness. Believe in me that you don't need to suffer from anything.
How do you surpass the god ending of the original game? Well, they sure tried, and it's certainly a big moment, a big boss fight for sure. For Throw Away Your Mask, this takes place in Phase 2 of that final boss fight. If I remember correctly, it's almost like the final encounter with Ganon in Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, where it's not that difficult at that point. It's more ceremonial.
It's the victory lap.
Yeah, exactly. The big strategy of the fight is over. This is the crowning moment of awesome, if you will, to borrow a TV trope moment, if you will. So yeah, that's why you kind of get this sort of feeling. But the whole track, you kind of get the going on. It's got some big energy behind it, and really think this is a great way to round out the narrative with this song.
Both Persona 5 and Persona 4's final boss themes disappoint me a lot, especially in comparison to Battle Hymn of the Soul.
Yeah,
but
sure.
That's too high a bar to put anything up to. That's one of the best final boss themes ever.
Yeah.
But I'm glad there are vocals here, because that's I think the part that is missing from both of those two songs in those two games. I don't like the Genesis. I don't think it's good. I think it's good. It's just it doesn't fit as well. And then I don't remember what the 5 final boss theme is called. I know a lot of people like it, but I don't think it works as well.
It's the name of the god.
Is it?
Yeah.
I thought I had like a full name though. Cause it's in Smash where they gave it a name, but I don't remember what it's called. The point is, like, when your game leverages vocals for so much of the soundtrack, it frits to put them in the final boss theme too. Cause it gives it that sort of unique feeling, and I'm glad that this one does that. I don't know if anything I'm making makes sense.
No, it does. It does. Do they call it Our Beginning in Smash?
Yes, Our Beginning. Yes,
okay.
yes.
That kind of makes sense. And I think your point with the vocals is very apt, because the phase 1 of this is similar and it's instrumental. And so this, to add Lynn's vocals in here, gives it like that extra bit. Yeah, it's the victory lap for sure.
That's kind of how 3 is, where Battle Hymn of the Soul has vocals, but they're more instrumental vocals because they're opera. They're not actually singing lyrics. And then you get the victory lap ending sequence, which is Burn My Dread, last battle version. And it gives it more impact, I feel like. I don't know.
Some tracks on the cutting room floor for Persona 5 Royal. Joe, I feel like I've picked up on enough of your music tastes throughout the years of doing this show. The fact that we can say years plural is still crazy, but I gave you a couple to talk about, so hit me with them.
All right, let's see. The first one is No More What Ifs.
People come and they go. Some people may stay with you though. I am all alone tonight, and I can't escape.
So this apparently plays in the Jazz Club in the new Kichijoji area. Akechi frequents this place, which makes it a bad place to go, and you can... Sorry, I had to throw that in. There are several confidant scenes you can have with him here, apparently. Yeah, it's Lin Inazumi doing lounge jazz, and it's really, really good. Like, I don't think there's any more to say. Lyrics were apparently, again, written by Lotus Juice, which, man... I'm glad he's, like, more involved in Persona now, after, like, basically being completely absent for both the original P5 and Persona 4. But yeah, it's really, really nice. And apparently this is Shoji Megaro's favorite new song that was written for Royal specifically.
Yeah, they definitely noted this one in interviews. This also has an instrumental version that you'll hear most of the time, but on certain days, I think it's more like the days you're with Akechi, you'll have Lynn's vocal version, and it's so good, nice and chill and laid back, and it's a contrast to what you hear for most of Persona 5, but it's also bringing out the gorgeous in a different way.
It feels very similar to Beneath the Mask in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And the other track on the cutting room floor is Gentle Madman. This is the final Palace theme for the third semester section. A lot of piano in here. Sounds very tense. Yeah, no, you're right. I dig this a lot. This is really good. I'm a fan.
Yeah, right? It's definitely not what you'd think of as like the final Palace, so to speak, especially when you had some of those other Palace themes at the end of Persona 5. But this has a very different feeling to it. Where you start to question, like, is the antagonist right in what they're thinking? A gorgeous, gorgeous Palace theme, and definitely one that had to be here. It was certainly one that was like up there when we were making our Critical 5 for Best of 2020. And wow, this is a really good one, I think. For me, I had a couple, and they're also important songs to touch on in the Persona 5 Royal soundtrack. Let's get to Ideal and the Real. Among the new characters that you will meet in the game to have confidant social links with, there is a school counselor to help the students after the troubling events that take place near the end of the first chapter of the game. So Takuto Maruki is brought in to be a counselor character, and they even have the social link named Counselor. So really kind of nailing exactly what his role in this game is. And so this theme is composed by Toshiki Konishi. It's the only one on the list here that he composed, but this is a really good one. And this plays during the counselor sessions that you have with Maruki at the school, basically his social link confidant scenes. And it's just a nice little piece with this dunk, 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 little vibe behind it. But then you got the electric piano in there, something that almost sounds a little theremin-like in there to kind of, with thoughts about psychology and really kind of going deep into those subjects there. Really neat stuff. Great scenes with Maruki for sure. And a nice little supporting track behind it that's new for the game.
This feels like Trauma Team.
Yeah.
Like, that's the only thing that comes to mind when I listen to this, to the point where I just looked up Trauma Team to make sure Toshiki Konishi didn't work on it. He didn't. So.
Well, also big Persona Q vibes, right? And so, like, that's kind of the translation of his work, and, like, you're kind of getting that similar feeling there. But, with Meguro going on and developing games now and working on that, maybe he'll come back. Hopefully he'll come back for Persona 6. If it has to be in Konishi's hands, I think it's going to be pretty good stuff, honestly. The other track on the cutting room floor for me that I have is Mementos, Upper Layer. Oh my gosh, we can finally talk about the Mementos theme on this show, because this Mementos theme isn't garbage. If you'll remember, if you played the original Persona 5, that theme was very much like it's just slow and plodding and dissonant and boring and not great. especially when it was the only theme for mementos throughout the entire game. See, Shoji Meguro notes that, quote, back in P5, I wanted mementos' music to change in tone as you got farther down. However, I was only able to put one track in at the time, so I knew it was something that I had to address for P5R. That's why I added 4 tracks this time. And so this is the start of your mementos adventure. I feel like it's the lightest, but kind of gives you like the simplest roots and building blocks of this. And it just sounds so much better as you get deeper and deeper into these randomly generated dungeon levels. It gets heavier. It works in the older theme a little bit more as you get deeper with that just grungier sound to it. But this one was a great addition. It was such a refreshing change of pace to hear it. And I hope, Joe, that you, as you go through Mementos, will appreciate the new music there.
Oh, I guarantee you I will. I heard first, I don't remember why, but I heard the original Mementos music recently, and it was a reminder of, oh yeah, this sucks. This sucks, and it's in a part that's already like the weakest part of the game that you have to keep going back to. So yeah, I'm glad to hear there is different stuff there now.
It's such just a much better experience overall with Mementos. And then you get to meet Jose. Why is his name Jose? That's a good question. But yeah, lots of things to discover in Persona 5 Royal. What will I never forget about this game? All of it. Going back and experiencing it again with my fiance has been such a delight to even see things that I may have missed even in the 2 times that I played it. Like when I actually read the tutorials with her for battles. Yeah, I somehow did not know that guns refill after every battle.
Oh yeah, that's the first thing I learned of like, oh, that's great. Guns aren't useless now.
Like, how did I not know that? You can use guns and like not be penalized for it. Like, yeah, so use that all the time, especially if, enemies have weaknesses. Oh my goodness. So good. They're actually worth upgrading this time and adding effects in on them. Like, do you want to put enemies to sleep, etc.? Oh my gosh. Yeah. So it's been neat to experience things like that, but this is one of the best soundtracks in games. And we're going to have to see what happens as we'll talk about shortly here with Best of 2010s coming up for episode 200. Where will Persona 5 rank?
I can give an idea. Because I can, right now, just as a little preview, Persona 5 has gotten more votes in total than literally any other game on any of the surveys.
Well, we'll keep that in perspective then. But then the fact that Royal only makes the soundtrack better, I feel like it's a special game music experience with this game. So that is what I'll never forget.
I'm looking forward to playing it on Switch. It's finally come to Switch. I'm more looking forward to 3 and 4 showing up on Switch because I think I'm going to do a max length run of 3 on stream when that comes out. I'm not streaming Royal because Matt and I will already be doing that in like 7 years, where we're already talking about like, how are we going to do that? We can't have 2 Persona 5 streams running like simultaneously for 6 months.
Yeah, that'll be a long time over on Smasher Pieces. Wow. Well, boy, Joe, you nailed it. Let's bring back that theme again. Games where somebody explores a castle alongside their animal companion, and that castle is owned by a pervert. Perfectly describes Haunting Ground and Persona 5 Royal. I love it. That's great. And that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at String Pixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, and that's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, the aforementioned Smasher Pieces, is hosted, and you can find Original Soundchat and Smasher Pieces wherever you get your podcasts on catchers all over the globe, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify. Now on Spotify, we have a feed of podcast episodes, but we also have a playlist where if we talk about a video game track on this show and it's on Spotify, gets added to that monster video game music playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
This week, both of these games are shockingly on Spotify. I'm mostly surprised about Haunting Ground being on there.
Yeah. Wow. Good job, Capcom.
I think it's also down as Demento, but I'm not sure, but it's on there.
Excellent. Good stuff there. When you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with these episodes? Also give us suggestions for games to cover in the future. Joe, by the time this episode comes out, we are continuing our working plans for Best of 2010s in game music for episode 200 of the show. And there's a way that you can help out with that.
Yeah, so right now, at time of release, we have finished the initial first round for the first two sets of 5 years. Now, the top 25 from those sets of 5 years being 2010 to 2014 and 2015 to 2019, those are going on their own surveys where, once again, we need you to pick your 5 favorite soundtracks, and that will bring us down to, I believe the plan is 20, and that'll be the pool that we work through to get the top 10 figured out.
We've really appreciated the help so far. It's been great. So thank you so much for that, and we'll keep that going. Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Jasper Byrne.
And I will be talking about Naofumi Harada. All right, to play us out with a fan cover or a fan remix, the song that has been stuck in my head with this game, especially watching it lately, it's got to be Take Over. And, of course, many YouTube musicians have done covers of Persona 5 Royal songs, but I came across Lolia on YouTube, Lollia, and she did her cover of Take Over, especially with her vocals, with the music and arrangement by Sleeping Forest on YouTube. It's a real neat take on the song, and I definitely enjoyed it. Hope to pass it along to you and hope you enjoy it. Thanks so much for listening this week on Original Sound Chat. We'll see you next time. Take care.